I hope you all enjoyed last week. Again, that was part 1 of 4. Tonight will be part 2 of this Patriot Academy, which is just an incredible work. And like I said, part of the reason that this whole thing exists is because, and this Patriot Academy exists, is part of from the ministry of this church and our Liberty Pastors Network. And so as you watch this, obviously we're gathering, gaining a lot of information, but it also should be kind of a sense of pride for this church of, this is what the Lord, part of what the Lord is doing. And again, an opportunity to reach 5 million people over the next 365 days is pretty stinking cool. So without any further ado, Dan, if you would.
Welcome back to week 2 of Rebuilding Liberty. Last week, we began to just kind of get the big picture of what we're doing. We went through the Declaration of Independence that we'll be celebrating in just over a year. We talked about those principles in the Declaration, but tonight we're really going to dive in to those foundations. We said last week from the Declaration of Independence that we should lay our government and its foundation on the principles and organize its powers in such forms as we think would most affect our safety and happiness. So tonight, we're going to talk about those principles that we're laying that foundation on. And our master bricklayer tonight that is going to be teaching is one of my mentors. I think the greatest historian alive in America today. He is America's premier historian, read more of the Founding Fathers than anyone alive today. I would even argue he probably has retained more than the next 10 historians combined. It's absolutely incredible what David Barton has done for our country. He's literally the George Whitefield of our day. He's our Nehemiah, and I'm proud to call him a mentor. I first found David Barton when somebody handed me one of those old cassette tapes. Anybody remember those? Yeah, they handed me this cassette tape, and I hated history up to that point. So boring. I just, all you did was memorize dates and names and places, and I popped in that cassette, and history came to life. I could see what was happening. I was literally watching history happen through the eyes of the people that experienced it. David's an absolute master at bringing that to life. So I fell in love with it. I started gobbling up everything he put out. I had this box in my truck. I called it my University on Wheels, and I had all of his cassette tapes. I was memorizing everything he had. Then I started using it as I go out there and speak. And then one day I'm giving this speech, and I had no idea his parents were in the audience. I'm using all of his material. And they didn't used to tell it this way, and he would probably deny it, but I'm pretty sure his mom went to him and said, "Hey, this kid has stolen all your material, so you might as well hire him." So that's how I got connected to David and Cheryl, and they've been wonderful mentors to Karen and me both, and we're thrilled to be a part of Wall Builders. I can genuinely say it's a professional honor of my life to have learned at this man's feet for the last 2 decades and to be able to march into battle after battle with him, and we are blessed to have him tonight to help us rebuild liberty. Y'all welcome your master bricklayer for the night, David Barton.
Sir.
Appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, man. Hey, guys, good to be with you. Now, I want to take you into history that's probably a little more recent. People actually in this room, some would have been alive at the time of this history. And it goes back to actually what happened in 1962. It's part of legal history. The U.S. Supreme Court in 1962, they came down with a decision that was called Engel versus Vitale. In that decision, they said, we've had prayer in public for a long time. We've had prayer in schools for a long time, but we're not going to do that anymore. And so what they did at that point in time, they said, no, prayer in school is no longer constitutional. Now, at this point in time, we're coming up on 2 centuries under the Constitution. We've done this for 2 centuries, but it's not going to be constitutional anymore. Within 12 months and 2 more decisions, Abbott and Shimp and Murray Collette, they said, and by the way, this thing about using the Bible in schools, we're not doing that anymore either. Now, this is something that has been part of education all the way back prior to the Constitution, but they said, we're not doing this anymore. And so in a 12-month period of time and 3 decisions, they've completely changed the culture of America as far as religious expression goes. And so this is what happened. This is where progressivism really became standardized in the court. They just kind of made up stuff because it's time to make progress. So what you find is this approach that they took, it had no historical legal precedent, and they acknowledged that in their decisions. They said, what we're doing here has no historical, no legal precedent. It's just time to do something new in America. What happened was so many cases came to the court that you start saying, wait a minute, does the First Amendment, what does it mean now? And the court said, well, we'll tell you what it means. The First Amendment is essentially what we'll tell you. The court started getting so many challenges to public religious expression that they said, look, we can't take all these. We're going to have to come up with a standard whereby you can know what is and isn't constitutional. And that case was in 1971. It's called Lemon versus Kurtzman. And what they came up with was a 3-pronged test. It's now called the Lemon test because it came out of the Lemon v. Kurtzman test. case, and they said, okay, if you want to know if something is constitutional, the number one thing to tell you if a religious activity is constitutional, if its primary purpose is secular.
There's a case called Lemon. It is aptly named. It is a lemon of a case.
Right.
And really it goes back to, it's our establishment clause. The very first thing when you get into the First Amendment is not establishing religion. And that's because, of course, our founders came from like the Church of England, and we didn't want there to be a nationally established church. But in Lemon, in the early 1970s, they said, well, we think it means more than that. We think it means that anywhere government is, religion can't be. And so our whole lives, I mean, it's been for 50 years.
Yeah.
Nativity scenes are banned on the lawn of a county or a city. A menorah for Hanukkah.
How many cases have you tried over a cross in a cemetery?
All over the place.
Yeah.
And even the stuff we see in schools with religion happens at school, and it's like there's a fire. Why? Because any of that is in the Constitution? No, because of the Lemon case. It was cited over 7,000 times in 50 years to attack religious freedom.
The number one thing to tell you if a religious activity is constitutional, if its primary purpose is secular. Now, can you name a religious activity whose primary purpose is secular? Since that time in 1971, the court has cited the Lemon test over 7,000 times. Every conceivable aspect of faith and public life has come before the court, and the court said, no, we gave you the Lemon test. If it's not primarily secular, it's unconstitutional. And this is where we become a very secularist society. I don't say secular, secularist. It's committed to secularism. It's intolerant of religion. So the whole thing turned in the culture. Now, fortunately, it didn't stay that way. We've had a change, and that change is really in more recent years. That change occurred when we had a Supreme Court that actually started reading the Constitution of the United States. That's a novel idea. You take an oath to uphold it. Why don't you read it? They did, and they said, we can't come to the same conclusion that previous courts have come to. 2019, there was a case that reached the court. This is called the Bladensburg Cross. This is a war memorial cross. At the end of World War I, and there were about 25 moms in Maryland whose sons had been killed in World War I, and they erected this cross on city land to say we want to honor the memory not only of our sons but of all those that were lost in World War I.
We started really going after this 4 years ago when we had the Bladensburg Cross case, which is a veterans memorial that was put up by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And it sat there for almost 100 years until the American Humanist Association said, hey, you can't have this cross. You know, at the Court of Appeals, they said, yeah, why don't you just cut the arms off the cross, and that way nobody will be offended and we won't have to tear it down. And we were like, wow. That's the craziest thing. That was a federal Court of Appeals judge, and they ruled 2-1 after almost 100 years it was unconstitutional. So when we went to the Supreme Court, we just thought, I just cannot imagine this Supreme Court tearing down a 100-year-old veterans memorial. So maybe this is the time to go after Lemon. I mean, it's 50 years, it's 7,000 citations. It really is an uphill battle.
And so what happened was that same year is when the Coach Kennedy case came to the court. You remember it was Kennedy versus Bremerton. Bremerton School District out West Coast would not let him pray after a football game. Football coach, after the game's over, he goes out, he kneels down by himself, he prays by himself, silent prayer. You can't do that. That's unconstitutional. People might see you doing something religious, and you can't do that.
And so when we got to the Coach Kennedy case, we were like, there's never been a case at the Supreme Court on the rights of teachers or coaches with regard to their faith. So if we push for this sort of grand slam, get rid of Lemon, we might blow the case up. Let's win a really big case, and so we'll have the Lemon argument in here, but that won't be our main argument. Midway through the oral argument, just out of nowhere, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch, start talking about, I think it's time we might need to get rid of Lemon. And we're just like,
are you there?
Oh, we're in shock. Our eyes are as big as silver dollars because we can't believe they're saying this.
Yeah.
And we thought, but do they have the votes? And then the decision comes down, and they reverse Lemon.
Wow.
And I mean, the dissent is going crazy. 50 years, 7,000 citations over. Everywhere a cross went down, it comes back up. Everywhere 10 Commandments was put in the closet, it comes back out.
And so the court at that time made this statement. They said, long-standing, religiously expressive monuments, symbols, and practices require a strong presumption of constitutionality. If you can show us that this has been in the culture for a long period of time, we're going to presume that it's constitutional.
And the Lemon test was it's gone, right? So what's the new test for the Establishment Clause? What they said is, if something is a part of our history and tradition, some religious practice that we've done, then it is presumptively protected. We're not going to say you can't do that.
Yeah.
So like, prayer before the legislature. Well, the founders had a chaplain.
Yeah.
So this idea that, you can't pray, this takes care of a lot of the ridiculous attacks in God We Trust on the coin, all these attacks that we've had to deal with. The Pledge of Allegiance, we had to defend the Pledge of Allegiance in federal courts. I mean, this takes care of all that and takes us back to really who we are as a country when we founded and the principles that we were trying to protect.
So nearly everything that's been used to force secularization on America is now out the door. Now, this is not what most people know about today. They haven't heard about this strange thing. The media doesn't cover this kind of stuff. When you have a pro-faith and a pro-constitution kind of victory, don't cover that. So let's go back to what they said in 2019. Long-standing religiously expressive practices require a strong presumption of constitutionality. This is now what's called the history and tradition test. If you can show that something has a history and tradition in America, we're going to presume that it's constitutional. Now, how about the Bible in schools? Is there a history and tradition of Bible in schools? Let me take you back and take you back to the beginning, because this is a lot more than constitutional. We're going to go all the way back to the year 1643. That's the year the first public school law was passed in America. The second public school law passed in America, 1647. But all these early colonists that came over, they brought their kids with them, and they're landing in places where there are no schools, and we need schools because we want our kids to be educated. And so they start these schools. Now, as a result of that, this is the first law book in America. It goes back to 1650. This book is called the Code of 1650. You can see right there, the Code of 1650. This contains the first public school law. Now, that first public school law, what's the title of that public school law? Interestingly, it's called the Old Deluder Satan Act. Now, that's a fairly interesting title for a public school law. And it says this. It says, it being the one chief project of that old deluder Satan to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures as he had. Satan's number one purpose is to keep us from knowing the scriptures. That's how we had all the darkness in Europe. Every time we went to the scriptures, that's where light came and we made advances. And we're not going to have that darkness here in America. We're going to make sure everybody can read the scriptures. So said when you get 50 people into a community, you get a teacher, and when you get 100 people in a community, you build them a school. So this is the first public school law in America, the Old Deluder Satan Act. Now that's 1690. And it's interesting that by the time you get even just several generations later, strikingly, because we educated both boys and girls, this backwood colony of Massachusetts had the highest literacy rate for women of anywhere in the world. Higher than France and Spain and England, because you see, we thought everybody needs to know how to read so that you can read the scriptures, and so our literacy rate was through the roof. So even in this backwoods wilderness colony, higher literacy rate than across the rest of the world. Now, if you go to another year, let's take 1690. 1690 is the year that our very first school textbook came out that was printed in America. Prior to that, we used textbooks that came from the continent, England or wherever else. This is that very first public school textbook, this right here. It is called the New England Primer, this little bitty book right there called the New England Primer, and we used that New England Primer from 1690 all the way into the 20th century. This was still used as a first grade textbook. Now, when you go into it, they go through the ABCs, show you how to read, and then after they do that, they start associating certain concepts with the ABCs. This is called the rhyming alphabet. You see up there, A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. B, heaven defined, the Bible mind. C, Christ crucified for sinners died. And by the way, their S's don't look the same as our S's today, like the word sinner and sin. That's because they had two S's back then, a hard S and a soft S. That was much of a German influence. We got away from that in about 1812. But prior to that, as you read old books, there's that F that often appears as an S. But nonetheless, it continues. G is runs the glass, our life does pass. H, my book and heart must never part. Now, this is what we're learning in first grade. This is how we're learning the ABCs in first grade. And then you learn the ABCs by memorization of a passage associated with it. You see here, and by the way, you see the picture of the heart and the Bible inside the heart. My book and heart must never part. And that's what we're imparting from the very beginning. And you see here, A, alphabetical lessons for youth. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. That's a Bible verse. B, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. Another Bible verse. C, come unto Christ, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, he will give you rest. We're memorizing Bible verses in the very first public school textbook ever done in America. That's the way every student learned the ABCs, because that's just what we did in education. That's a history and tradition of education. If you go to 1781, in 1781, this is the end of the American War for Independence. We have just defeated the British at the Battle of Yorktown, and as a result of that, the British have laid down their arms, and for the first time since back in 1607, we're no longer under British domain. They do not rule us anymore. And so as a result of that, the king, it doesn't matter what he says. Well, one of the things the king said was that if you live in any English-speaking country, you cannot print a Bible in English. You will use the one that we tell you to use. And so there were several Bibles that were fairly critical of the king, like the Geneva Bible that Pilgrims and Puritans brought with them. It was very critical of many bad practices that were not biblical in Europe, and it said so, and kings didn't like that. So they said, no, we'll tell you what Bible to use. Well, now that we've beat the British, we're not under that law anymore. So we beat them in 1781, and the first English language Bible ever printed in America came out in 1782. It's one of the rarest books in the world. They printed 10,000 of them. There's 2 or 3 dozen left today, and that particular book is exceptionally rare. And it's striking that in this book, as you look inside it, there are several things that kind of stand out at you. Number one, it's printed by Robert Aiken. Why is that important? Because he's the official printer of the U.S. Congress. He does all the printing for Congress. And you continue to look inside that, and oh my goodness, there's a congressional committee talking about this Bible. And you continue to look past that, and you see down here that it says, United States and Congress assembled recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States. I thought our founding fathers were a bunch of atheists, agnostics, and deists who wanted a secular public square, who didn't want the Bible in schools. And by the way, Robert Aiken, as he's going through explaining this to Congress, Robert Aiken told them very clearly, he said, this is a neat addition to the Holy Scriptures for the use of our schools. What a perfect Bible for every school to be able to use. And here's actually his handwritten document saying that to Congress. So you look back to 1782, that's a fairly significant time when it comes to the Bible in schools, when you have a history and tradition test. So this is the first Bible printed in America, called the Bible of the Revolution, first English language Bible printed in America, the Bible of the Revolution. Then let's go to 1789. George Washington is now president, and we have a lot of territory in the United States that is not yet part of the United States. It's called the Northwest Territory. There's also the Southern Territory and Central Territories. But they said, we got the 13 colonies over here, now 13 states. What are we going to do with all this other territory? How did they become states in the United States? And so they went through and laid out the provisions, said if you want to become a state, number one, number two, and they went through all the stuff they did. And so it's called originally the Northwest Ordinance because it was passed for the Northwest Territory. Now, 32 states after that came in under those provisions. But it's interesting. Article 3 says, religion, morality, and knowledge be necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. Schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. So signed by George Washington in federal law, this is the provision whereby states can come into the United States if your schools are encouraging religion, morality, and knowledge. That's the way you become a state in the United States. Now, it's interesting. We're told today, oh no, education's got to be secular. Just go back and check a number of the state constitutions. A number of the state constitutions say forever in the schools of this state, religion and morality will be taught as well as knowledge. Why did they say that? Because that's the requirement to become part of the United States given us by the founding fathers, signed by George Washington. Secular education was not part of their concept. But then again, the court never claimed that it was. It just said, we're going to do something different. And now all the legal experts in the last 50 years said, oh no, that's what the founding fathers wanted. No. Go back to the original stuff. It's quite different. 1790 involves a founding father named Benjamin Rush. Now, Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration. John Adams said he's one of our 3 most notable founders. So out of 250 founders, John Adams says Benjamin Rush is one of the 3 most notable. So when you look at Benjamin Rush, one of the things that makes him significant, there's a whole lot of stuff, by the way, he is an awesome guy. But one of the things is he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. And that's because in 1790, he did this piece. He said, we used to be 13 nations. Now we're one nation. What do we need to be teaching in our schools for us all to remain one nation? What do we have to teach to keep us unified rather than having 13 different nations? And so he goes through and lays out in this. And he says, the only foundation for a useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue, and without virtue, there can be no liberty, and liberty is the object in life of all republican governments. So here are some of his educational essays. This is where he says religion has got to be central to education if we want a useful, and that's what he says, the only foundation for a useful education. Now you got all sorts of other educations, but if you want a useful education, you got to lay it in religion. So the next year he came out with this piece, The Bible in Schools. This little piece right here, he gave a dozen reasons why we would never take the Bible out of schools in America. Now, this is the father of public schools under the Constitution. He started 5 universities, 3 still go today. He did so much awesome work in education. And by the way, in this piece, he explains the Bible contains more knowledge to man in his present state than any other book in the world. This is why we teach it in schools. It's the most useful book out there. And it has all the stuff you need to know about medicine, about science, about ethics, about law, about business, or whatever. And that's what we believed about the Bible. That's why we taught it for so long. Go to 1816. And in 1816, what you have is the report from New Jersey. Now, all the schools have reports every year, just like we still do today. You can go online and see the reports annually. If you want to see the report for New Jersey in 1816, they're talking about how the kids have done in the first and second classes, or what we would call the first and second grades. And so how have the kids done according to the Superintendent of Public Education in New Jersey? He says very simply, all the scholars of the first and second classes commit to memory portions of the New Testament or Psalms, a lesson of the Catechism, several hymns, and the text of the preceding Sabbath. So all the kids in first and second grade, that's what they're memorizing in New Jersey public schools in 1816. We're now a generation after the Founding Fathers. It's not the Founding Fathers anymore. We're much later. And he continues, he says, one of the scholars, first and second grade, one of the scholars has committed to memory the book of John and the first 30 Psalms together with the 119th Psalm. Anybody here memorize the Gospel of John and 30 Psalms and Psalms 119? Nah, you're not as smart as second graders back then. Amazing. And by the way, we all know that there's some kids that are smarter than other kids in classes, right? So he's one of those kids, obviously. How about the rest of the kids? The majority have committed to memory the Gospel by John. All the first and second graders memorized the Gospel of John, but we had one kid who also memorized 30 chapters of Psalms and Psalm. All the kids memorized the Gospel of John in first and second grade in New Jersey public schools in 1816. Let's move to 1828. 1828 involves Noah Webster. This is when Noah Webster came out with his original dictionary, the Noah Webster Dictionary. Now, Noah Webster did so many works, that educational works. He's called the father, he's called the schoolmaster to America. He's so much of the father of the English language as far as what happens with the structure of it. And so in that dictionary, he defines 70,000 words, 40,000 never before been defined. He learned 28 languages so that he could tell you the root of every word that he takes in that dictionary. Awesome what the guy did. So when you take words and look in Webster's dictionary, for example, take his dictionary, let's take a word like, you see up top, chief? See, he gives you definitions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 definitions there. And look what he does. Right up there, you see that one? It says chief. He's quoting from 1 Chronicles chapter 11. So if you want to know how this word is used in context, go look at 1 Chronicles 11. And here's another example here. You see there? Go look at Numbers 3 and Job 29 and Matthew 20 if you want to see how this word is used in context. And if you want another definition, here, look at 1 Kings 9. And down here at the bottom, you need to go to Psalm, that would be Psalm, 58? He takes you back to the Bible. 27% of the definitions he used, he took to the Bible. So this is our dictionary in the day. It's not the secular thing that we have today. Webster's dictionary today only has its name in common with what it used to be back then. It was a very biblical-centric dictionary that he had. So Noah Webster, that 1828 dictionary, and by the way, with all the other textbooks he did, he was very clear, his philosophy, his view of America, his view of education. He says, all the miseries and evils which men suffer from vice, crime, ambition, injustice, oppression, slavery, and war, they all proceed from despising or neglecting the precepts contained in the Bible. So again, going back here, 1849 is a significant year in the sense of President Zachary Taylor. He's known as Old Rough and Ready. He's a war hero. He became President of the United States. Look at the declaration from the President. He says, the Bible is the best of books. I wish it were in the hands of everyone. It's indispensable to the safety and permanence of our faith. Oh, no, he didn't say faith. He said of our institutions. The Bible has secular application. It's the basis of our institutions. He continued. He says, especially should the Bible be placed in the hands of the young, it is the best school book in the world. I would that all of our people were brought up under the influence of that holy book. Zachary Taylor will never be accused of being part of the religious right as a president. That was not who he was. He was old, rough, and ready. He was a tough old codger, and nobody thought of him as a religious person. And yet, look at the rhetoric that we have from the President of the United States back then. And by the way, best school book in the world? Apparently, the Supreme Court didn't consult history. We know they didn't. That's why they arrived at the conclusion they did. So 1876, the president now is Ulysses S. Grant, another very tough president, very adequate guy, a very able guy as a military commander. He headed the Union forces in the Civil War, but he's the president for the centennial of the United States. 1876, he's president. We were founded in 1776. He comes out with this card. You see this little card right here? This is a centennial card. It's the message of President Grant. This message of President Grant, see there, centennial, 1876, 1776, 100 years. It's to the children and youth of America. What does President Grant want to tell all the students of America? He says, hold fast to the Bible as the sheet anchor of your liberties. Write its precepts in your hearts and practice them in your lives. To the influence of this book, we're indebted for all the progress made in true civilization, and to this we must look as our guide in the future. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin's a reproach to any people. By the way, that's a Bible verse, Proverbs 14:34. There's your President of the United States saying, kids on the centennial of America, get back to the Bible. This is what's made us who we are as a people. So there's a lot I can show you here. I'm going to close with one more. In 1947, these two textbooks right here, these two textbooks were being used. You can see on the cover here, this is the Bible study course for the Old Testament Dallas Public Schools, 1947. And the one behind it is the one for the New Testament in 1947, Dallas Public Schools. Now, these are not just Dallas textbooks. They were used in Cincinnati and St. Louis. They were used in Indianapolis. They were used in major cities across the nation. And as you go, and these are courses for credit in the public schools. As you go through, you see here, memorize. There's a memorization section for each lesson. Memorize the preexistence of Christ. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made. This is what we're memorizing in public schools as a course in Dallas and Cincinnati and all these big cities. And then it has questions at the end of every lesson. You study some of the Bible and you have questions. Questions on lesson number 1 on the preexistence of Christ, John 1:1-14. Where was Christ before he was born on earth? What titles does John apply to Christ in this chapter? For what purpose was John sent by God? And on it goes. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. I'm going to bet most ministers couldn't answer the questions that were answered by Dallas Public School high school kids. This is what we had till 1947 all over the United States. And we think that the way it is now is the way it's always been, and that people who want religion back in public life are crazies. No, it's because we don't know history. And so as you look at the Bible in schools and look at where we are at this, we're at this point where the long-standing religiously expressive practices require a strong presumption of constitutionality. If you can show that it's been part of the American fabric for a period of time, we're going to presume that it's constitutional. And this comes, we're talking religious practices here. So that is the history and tradition test. And why does that matter? Because when you look right now, did you know that based on the 2019-2022 Supreme Court decision, you can be teaching the Bible in schools right now. Your public schools can teach that with no trouble. And as a matter of fact, one of the groups that does this, BibleInSchools.net, they have currently teaching in 4,000 public schools, and they have 600,000 students going through, and the only textbook they use in the course is the Bible. You just teach the Bible. Bible speaks for itself. This can be done. Nobody hears about this. We didn't know this was going on. You got a public school near you? Go talk to the superintendent, talk to the school board. You're going to have trouble with school board attorney. School board attorney knows only the modern stuff, not the historical stuff, and they usually don't keep up with recent Supreme Court decisions. They may be good on personnel or administration or insurance. They're not good on constitutional issues. So you may have to teach them some of this, but this is something you can do in schools. Same way, nativity scenes, that used to be part of schools, and then we said, oh, no, Christmas, that's too religious. Christmas is a federal holiday to celebrate the birth of Christ. It's not a federal holiday to celebrate the birth of Rudolph and Santa. That's not what it is. So we can go back to singing Christmas carols, and choirs can do that, and they can have Christmas programs and all this stuff they haven't been able to do in decades. Talk to your choir teachers, talk to your school teachers, talk to your principal about this. Same way with prayer in schools. As long as students are praying, it's fine. Student-led prayer, it's constitutional. Now, they can't pop up and start praying in math class if nobody else is doing anything, math class except the teacher, but you can have prayer at school again. You can have prayer at graduations again. You can have baccalaureates, all the things we used to not be able to do. We have a long-standing tradition of history and law on this. And another example is balanced science. Do you know, creation, evolution debates don't go to Darwin, 1859. They go all the way back 500 BC to Aristotle. Everything Darwin set forth had been set forth hundreds of years before that. There's nothing new about what Darwin did. He just synthesized 2,000 years of teaching and made it really simple, brought it down to something really easy. It's not that there's new teachings. As a matter of fact, if you'll check the 1801 senior paper for Daniel Webster as a 17-year-old senior at Dartmouth, his senior paper is over the evolution creation debate in that day. Nothing new about it. Founding fathers speak very openly of evolution creation, something they address. This is not a new issue that comes from Darwin. We can go back to teaching creation science if we want to, because that's history and tradition. That's something that scientists have taught for thousands of years. It goes back a long time. This is not just religious teaching. So all these things are available. Long-standing religiously expressive practices require a strong presumption of constitutionality. I encourage you to be forward-thinking, be aggressive. Realize you've got a lot of tools at your disposal maybe we haven't used in recent years, but I just want you to know what the Supreme Court has said, and in this area what the history and tradition is, so that we can move forward and move these things back into helping America be a wholesome nation. God bless you guys. Rick?
It is astounding to me how many people in America have been indoctrinated into a condition of complete ignorance, completely unaware of the extent to which the Bible and ancient Jewish wisdom shaped the founders. It's not an accident that the crests of these old schools like Yale and Harvard contain Hebrew words, because to these people who came here and set things up, the people we think of as the founders, Hebrew was something they knew. The second governor of the Plymouth colony was Sir William Bradford, and the first 19 pages of his manuscript, his history book, the history of the Plymouth plantation, is actually in his own handwriting in Hebrew.
Oh, you're going to learn all types of wonderful things, as you've already learned in this class, about our founding fathers, about the freedoms and liberties, about what people paid for. What does it mean to be a constitution? What does it mean to have a Bill of Rights? What does it mean to have a Declaration of Independence? What does it mean to have a free nation? What does it mean to fight for your freedoms? What does all that mean? That's what you're learning so that you can take it out into the streets. But I say none of this matters if it's not Jesus first. That's where the miracle takes place.
On average, there's about 8,000 requests a year for the Supreme Court to take your case. And the last few years, they've taken 57 and 67. The idea that they would take one of your cases is your odds are not good. Well, they just took 4.
Wow.
And we won them all, right? And
only God, like you said
that's
earlier.
only God. Yeah. And so what I like is wherever God is moving, I'm just going to jump in the middle of that,
yes.
Right? And so there's a lot of bad things going on in our country right now, but something's changing here. I mean, why is God doing this in the religious liberty arena? Why is He opening up all these protections? It's not so people won't step in that protection and act, but He's got a plan. There's something going on, and so I just encourage people to be encouraged. It's not, the war is not over. Almost the image I have is it's like all of our children and our grandchildren are in a castle. They've been stolen away. And we've been blocked from getting in. And God just blew holes in the wall of the castle. So it's not over. We still have to, we can't stand at the opening and go, wow, that's a really neat hole. But God is really providing this new opportunity for us to change our country and to restore religious freedom in a way we haven't seen in our lives really at this point.
You know, you're hearing it everywhere. It's around us at a depth and velocity like we've never seen in our lifetime. It's literally taking people down a spiral of destruction. And it's what we call deception. Just take a look around. Look at the young people in your life. Look at the people all around you where deception is after them with a vengeance. You know, we have a responsibility as parents, grandparents, pastors, educators, mentors, and coaches. We can feel the urgency now more than ever. It's an urgency to inoculate this next generation against those same old ideas that have led to bondage throughout the course of history every time they've been tried. And we got to ask ourselves, do our sons and daughters know how to detect the lies in the culture? Do they know how to apply timeless, life-giving standards of truth rooted in the gospel to the problems of today? Are they ready to step out in courage when it's their turn, their chance to influence and lead a generation away from bad ideas with dangerous consequences? The real question is, has their education prepared them for this reality? Look, if you're between the ages of 16 and 25 and you're within the sound of my voice, this message is for you. No matter your personality, what your passions are, or the station of life or career you find yourselves in, the fight has come to you. The preparation you need does not happen by accident. It takes purposeful sharpening, role play, and intentionality to train for battle. And that's where Patriot Academy comes in. It's not a summer camp, it's a boot camp. Patriot Academies take place in state capitals across the nation throughout the summer, and we teach you essential communication skills and how to assess the ideas around you, but through a lens we call the LIFT principles. That's limited government, individual liberties, the free enterprise market system that rejects dangerous ideas like socialism and communism, and then lastly, it's timeless principles of truth. Our 3-day boot camp is just the beginning of a lifelong journey of learning on how to influence and take action to advance freedom no matter where God leads you. Because of the connections you'll make, you're going to have full access to a network of leaders who stand ready to engage the culture and stand with courage with you. Make the decision today. Be the influencer that God has destined you to be. Be that one person who's equipped, strategically placed, and takes action.
So welcome to the fire. I'm the one with the light. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire. Welcome to the fire. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire.
Hey, welcome back to the tavern portion of our Rebuilding Liberty course. I hope you got you a hot cup of Patriot Brew coffee and you're ready to discuss those revolutionary strategies and tactics to implement the things that we learned tonight in our class. Now, don't forget, last week we talked about restoring those declaration principles, rebuilding civic literacy in our country by hosting a Rebuilding Liberty course. I hope you've already started thinking about friends and family to invite to your first class by actually being a part of the 250th next year and being a part of creating a celebration, whether it's at your home or your church, your county courthouse, but hosting a 250th celebration July 4th, 2026. And then third, getting the Constitution back into our schools, whether you do that for Constitution Day or you get a Celebrate Freedom Week passed in your state. Learn more about all of that in our Blueprint book or in your workbook. Those are the things we talked about here in the tavern last week. This week, we want to capitalize on this opportunity that David was talking about. The Coach Kennedy case changed everything.
we have the opportunity to get a God consciousness back into our culture. I'm going to give you 3 action items tonight. Number 1, I want you to be a part of getting In God We Trust, the national motto, in every government building you possibly can. On the dais of the school board where they meet, or the city council, or the county commissioners. At your state capitol, we have that in Texas. In God We Trust, above the dais there in the House chamber. Everywhere you can, get In God We Trust displayed so that people will think about that national motto and restore that God consciousness. If you look in your workbook or the blueprint, we're going to connect you with the organizations that will send you a kit on how to do this. It's easy to do. You can get this one done, I promise you. So pick out a couple of places in your community where you can make this happen. Maybe that's the action item for you. As I said last week, 12-step recovery program. You don't have to do all 12. You just got to pick 1 or 2. So this week I'm giving you 3 more in addition to the 3 I gave you last week. In God We Trust motto, the 10 Commandments. We got a lot of states now that are doing 10 Commandments legislation to make it very clear you absolutely can display the 10 Commandments in the local schools. The Stone v. Graham case has been overturned. The Kennedy case has changed everything. Do your part to get the 10 Commandments displayed in schools, county courthouses, other government entities, and even in your own home. And then the 3rd step tonight that I want to encourage you to do is help bring godly wisdom back into schools. This one's got some subparts, so you got to go to the workbook or the blueprint book to get the context of some of these organizations. But getting, for instance, chaplains in our local public schools, I encourage you to work with them to get a chaplain in your local public schools and maybe you're the one that should be that chaplain. Maybe you're looking for that next adventure or that next assignment from the Lord. Maybe that's one of the things that you can do. Maybe you want to work with some of the time release programs out there and be one of the ones that hosts a program next door to the local public school where the kids can come to your place. Maybe it's a church, maybe it's right down the road. Lots of ways to do this, but it's absolutely constitutional and a powerful way to bring that God consciousness and that godly wisdom back to your local school. And then, of course, Bible curriculum itself. This is absolutely constitutional. Most of your schools don't know that it's constitutional. We want to help you get Bible curriculum into your local schools. In fact, Patriot Academy is providing a specific Bible curriculum that we're going to have available in the next few weeks. I hope you'll check that out at patriotacademy.com. Lots of other great sources out there as well. But if that's that one that lights you up, then that's the one step out of the 12 steps to recovery for our country that you should get excited about. So lots of great options for you this week to restore religious liberty. We've got to do these things where we get this God consciousness back into our culture and we actually live out our faith. Think about it. What good is the freedom of religion if we're not living out our faith? So don't forget the 3 steps that we've added tonight. You can get In God We Trust, the national motto, hanging it up in your schools, getting it at your government, on the dais or behind the leaders there. Get the 10 Commandments into your local schools and your local government buildings. Get a godly wisdom back into your schools with chaplains at the schools, Bible curriculum, time release programs, all those options. Everything's in your workbook and in the blueprint. Look for a way to implement one of those steps. And don't forget the steps that we talked about last week. Already get signed up to host this class in your home or church, wherever you like. Make sure you're planning your 250th celebration. Great opportunity to restore civic literacy by bringing back those Declaration principles, and then get involved with getting the Constitution and the Declaration back into your schools. There's already a lot to do, folks, but get started. All right, I'll see you back here in the tavern next week for our action steps in week 3.
That should give you a lot of hope and a lot of solid ground to build on. So there's a lot we can do in our community. So this whole course is going to be about action, action, action. The things David's talking about, it's not just head knowledge. He's given us things we can actually go back and do in our communities. This has been week 2, and we've got 2 more weeks to go in this amazing course. Next week, Tim Barton is our master bricklayer that's going to be with us. Don't miss it. Have a great week, and thanks for helping us rebuild liberty.
All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed week 2. Was that a blessing or that good stuff? And I also hope you would like the actual actionable items. I remember growing up and going to different church conferences and stuff like that, and you're really motivated, and you're like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And I don't know, go do something. Well, yeah, you got action items, so that's pretty cool. The only other thing I would add on was that it was so I got to work for Kelly Shackelford, who was talking there, was one of my bosses at one point in time. And the Coach Kennedy case, when I actually got there, before the Lemon case was turned over, was when Coach Kennedy case came in across his desk. And we got to get started on how that was going to work, and I got to do some of the mindless research because I knew nothing, still don't know a whole lot, but I remember how hopeless it was. But a lot of those, the work that was done from the 60s and 70s when things were so poor was Christians consistently. It's almost like if you're ever trying to break concrete, you take this hammer and you just smack the concrete, and there's no change to it over and over again, but underneath it, it's just kind of rippling and breaking, and then finally there's that one smack and the thing just shatters. Well, that's basically what Christians did for 50 years, is they just kept smacking the concrete and smacking against the secular culture until finally, in the couple of recent years, it just started to shatter, and now we have a lot of momentum on our side, which is really, really exciting, and so it's an opportunity for us to take advantage of that. But also a reminder, if anything gets poor again, that it was the determination of those Christians in the 60s and 70s that never got to see the fruit of this, that just constantly didn't give up, stood against it when everything was hopeless, that we're now reaping a lot of the benefits from, which is really cool. And then the only other thing is, with these founders, when they talk about the Bible and everything, Daniel Webster, or Noah Webster, they're describing what the word chief is, and they've just got a biblical reference for it. Like, that should encourage us to know our Bible so well, so when our children ask us to explain something, we can say, oh, it's like this, and we can go to the Bible. Or if somebody, a coworker or a friend or someone is trying to ask something, our reference should be something Christian or something from the Bible. That should motivate us, because that's a part of this restoring this traditions of Christianity and this just general spiritual understanding of the Bible in our culture. And it begins with us being experts in the Bible to then incorporate it in our daily lives.